Bastion 4 was never meant to fall. It was humanity's shield on the frontier, a fortress world engineered to withstand any threat. Its planetary defenses could incinerate fleets, its walls were reinforced with the strongest alloys known to man, and its people were forged from generations of survival on the edge of known space. Yet, as the first explosions rocked the planet's outer rings, it became clear this was not an ordinary invasion. The Rotheri had come in force. From the command bunker deep within Bastion's central citadel, Governor Elias Voss watched the tactical display with a grim expression. Red enemy markers filled the screen like a spreading infection. The orbital defense platforms, which had once been humanity's unbreakable shield, were now burning wreckage in the void. The planetary defense grid was barely holding under the relentless assault of the Rotheri warships, their weapons punching through hardened fortifications with terrifying ease. The room was deathly silent, save for the occasional static burst from failing comms. Officers and strategists worked frantically, their eyes darting between screens filled with casualty reports and emergency requests. The situation was deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. Elias exhaled, his voice calm but resolute. "Send out the final transmission to Earth. Full distress signal." A communications officer hesitated. "Governor, we've lost the long-range relays." Elias turned sharply. "All of them." The officer swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. The Rotheri deployed jamming beacons. We're cut off." The room tensed. No reinforcements, no escape. Elias closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with newfound determination. If no help was coming, then Bastion 4 would fight alone. He turned to his daughter. "Lena, what's our fallback?" Commander Lena Voss was already in motion, her mind working faster than any war console. Tall, with piercing blue eyes and a combat-hardened demeanor, she had inherited both her father's leadership and her mother's tactical brilliance. She pointed at the map, where the first wave of Rotheri ground forces was descending in massive, blackened drop pods. They're hitting 3 main sectors: New Arcadia, the manufacturing zones, and the eastern mountain defenses. It's a full-spectrum invasion. No probing attacks, no negotiations. They're here to wipe us out. She glanced at her father. "That means we need to give them a reason to regret it." Elias nodded. "What's your play?" "We focus on containment. The city districts are a lost cause. We make them bleed for every block. The manufacturing zones are our lifeline. We hold them at all costs. The mountains give us high ground, but we can't let them control the passes. We set up demolition points. If they take the peaks, we bury them in rubble." One of the officers shook his head. "They outnumber us at least 20 to 1. How do we stop a force like that?" Lena's expression was ice. "We make sure they choke on every inch of ground they take." Outside, the sky turned crimson as the first enemy drop pods slammed into the surface. The siege had begun. The first Rotheri drop pods hit like meteors, shaking the earth with bone-rattling force. Within seconds, their armored doors exploded outward, and monstrous figures stormed into the burning streets of New Arcadia. 7 feet tall, clad in segmented black carapace, the Rotheri were a species bred for war. Their clawed hands gripped plasma rifles that could melt through steel, their movements unnervingly precise as they advanced in perfect formation. They expected slaughter. Instead, they found hell. Commander Lena Voss watched from a rooftop as the first wave of aliens spread through the ruined city. Civilians had already been evacuated, those who had chosen to leave anyway. The rest had stayed, armed with whatever they could find. Snipers lay in wait, their scopes trained on the invaders. Tripwires, rigged to homemade explosives, lined the streets. Hidden turrets, reprogrammed from decommissioned security droids, hummed as they tracked targets. The moment the Rotheri set foot past the first blockade, Lena gave the order. "Light them up." The city exploded. A chain reaction of detonations ripped through the narrow streets, catching entire squads of Rotheri in the blasts. High above, a repurposed construction drone released a payload of incendiary charges, turning a 4-story building into an avalanche of fire and debris. Screeches of rage echoed through the air as the aliens, caught off guard, scrambled for cover. From the wreckage, human fighters emerged. They were not soldiers, at least, not all of them. They were engineers, miners, factory workers, and ex-convicts who had known nothing but hardship. And they fought like demons. A unit of Rotheri stormed forward, their armor deflecting bullets, but then a welding crew hit them from behind, lash cutters splicing through their joints like butter. A towering Rotheri captain turned to retaliate, only for a steel rebar to punch through his skull. Driven by a construction worker using a hydraulic pylon, a pair of scavengers leaped from the rooftops, landing atop an enemy sniper, knives plunging between armor plates. The Rotheri had come expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they had landed in a killing field. Lena didn't have time to celebrate. Her comms crackled with an urgent message. "Commander, they've breached the manufacturing district. We're being overrun." The transmission cut to static. Lena's stomach tightened. The factories weren't just vital to Bastion 4's economy. They were its war engine. If the Rotheri took them, the defenders would lose their supply of weapons, armor, and vehicles. That couldn't happen. She tapped into the local command network. "All units in New Arcadia, fall back to secondary positions. Make them think we're retreating." She switched channels. "Riot crews, deploy the Inferno teams." There was a brief pause before a gruff voice responded. "You got it, Commander. We'll burn the bastards to the ground." Lena turned toward the factory district, her jaw set. The Rotheri thought they were winning. They had no idea what was coming. The factory district was already ablaze when Lena Voss arrived. Thick black smoke curled into the sky, mixing with the blood-red glow of burning buildings. Explosions rattled the air as automated assembly lines overloaded, sending molten metal spewing across the battlefield. Human defenders fought desperately to hold the perimeter, but the Rotheri were relentless, pushing forward in tight formations, using advanced energy shields to absorb gunfire. Then the ground began to shake. Lena knew what was coming before she even saw them. Dreadwalkers, the towering biomechanical war machines, stepped through the fire like creatures from a nightmare, their elongated frames covered in shifting plates of living metal. Each one stood 20 feet tall, with clawed limbs and multiple weapon arrays bristling from their backs. Their eyes, if they could even be called that, glowed a cold, predatory blue as they scanned the battlefield, adapting to every attack. One of them turned its gaze toward a human barricade and raised its arm. A bright, sickly green energy pulse gathered in its palm before a beam of pure plasma lanced outward. The barricade, along with the dozen defenders behind it, vanished in an instant. Panic spread. Soldiers fired wildly at the machines, but bullets pinged harmlessly off their shifting armor. A few well-placed rocket shots staggered them, but the walkers recalibrated, their exoskeletons shifting to absorb the impact. Nothing worked for long. Lena cursed under her breath. The Rotheri had deployed these machines against dozens of civilizations before. No species had ever survived them. But no species had ever been human. She activated her comms. "All units, fall back to grid point Sigma. Prepare the surge." There was hesitation from some officers, but then a single response came through. "Understood. Prepping the kill box." Lena watched as the human forces stopped firing and retreated in seemingly random directions, luring the Rotheri infantry and their dreadwalkers deeper into the factory district. The aliens, emboldened, pushed forward, not realizing they were being funneled toward a specific location. The power relay hub. Above, hidden among the ruins, human engineers made final adjustments to the hastily rigged electromagnetic pulse generator. It was a crude, last-minute creation, patched together from salvaged ship cores and industrial power grids. If it failed, the city would lose power entirely. If it worked. "Now," Lena ordered. The engineers triggered the surge. A deafening whump rippled through the air as an invisible shockwave spread across the battlefield. Every piece of advanced Rotheri technology died in an instant. The Dreadwalkers staggered, their limbs seizing as their adaptive plating failed. The once impervious machines now stood frozen, their organic components spasming violently. Without their shields or armor shifts, they were nothing but towering husks of metal. The humans didn't waste a second. With a roar, the defenders surged forward, planting explosives and hurling incendiary charges onto the crippled war machines. A massive explosion tore through the first walker, sending flaming debris raining down. Another toppled backward as a demolition crew buried high-yield charges into its exposed joints. The Rothari, caught off guard, faltered. Lena smirked. Now let's see them adapt to that. Bastion 4 was still standing. For now, the electromagnetic pulse had turned the tide for a fleeting moment, but the Rothari were nothing if not adaptable. Their warriors, stripped of their shields and advanced targeting systems, fought on with sheer brutality. They reverted to close-quarters combat, wielding curved plasma blades and razor-edged gauntlets that tore through human defenses like scythes through wheat. The sky was no longer visible. Smoke choked the air, blotting out the stars. Fires spread uncontrolled, casting eerie shadows over the battlefield. Bastion 4 was burning. Lena Voss stood atop a collapsed supply transport, her armor stained with soot and blood. She wiped grime from her visor and surveyed the chaos below. Her troops were holding, for now, but the Rothari were regrouping, forming disciplined battle lines beyond the ruins of the factory district. Then the sky split open. High above, the Rothari warships adjusted their formation. Their cannons, which had previously focused on orbital defenses, now turned toward the planet itself. Lena's heart pounded as she recognized the maneuver. Orbital bombardment. A deep mechanical hum filled the air as the first barrage began. Massive plasma lances rained down like vengeful gods, carving glowing scars into the planet's surface. Entire districts were vaporized in an instant. Streets cracked apart, sending civilians and soldiers alike tumbling into the inferno below. Shockwaves flattened buildings that had withstood the initial invasion. In the command bunker, alarms blared as Governor Elias Voss watched in horror. His voice was firm, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the table. "They're purging the city," he muttered. A lieutenant turned to him, panic in her voice. "Sir, we have to evacuate." "There's nowhere to evacuate to." Elias snapped. "Bastion 4 is the last stronghold. If we fall, there's nothing between them and the core worlds." On the battlefield, Lena ducked behind cover as another blast shook the ground. She activated her comms. "Status report." A crackling response came through. "East sector is gone. Leveled. Casualties in the thousands. They're not leaving anything standing, Commander." Lena clenched her jaw. The Rothari had changed their strategy. They weren't just here to conquer. They were here to erase humanity from existence. Her eyes flicked toward the command bunker in the distance. They had one advantage left. Elias Voss. As long as her father remained alive, Bastion 4's forces would hold, which meant the Rothari would be coming for him next. Her comms flared again, this time a different voice, one she didn't recognize. A guttural, inhuman growl came through the static, followed by a voice filled with cold amusement. "I see you, little commander." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. "Your walls will not hold. Your father will not survive. And when I carve through your defenses, I will take my time with you." The transmission cut off. Lena exhaled slowly, gripping her rifle. The Rothari weren't just sending an army this time. They were sending a monster. And he was coming straight for them. The Rothari voice still echoed in Lena's mind as she sprinted through the ruined streets toward the command bunker. The alien had spoken with a confidence that sent a chill through her bones. This wasn't just another battlefield commander. This was something else. The ground trembled beneath her boots. Something massive was approaching. A distant explosion lit up the horizon, and moments later, a hulking figure emerged from the smoke. The Warbringer. The Rothari commander stood nearly 10 feet tall, his armor a dark fusion of organic plating and advanced technology. Twin energy gauntlets crackled at his sides, each capable of tearing through reinforced steel. His crimson eyes burned with an unnatural glow, locked onto Bastion 4's central bunker. He moved with slow, deliberate steps, like a predator savoring the hunt. Around him, elite Rothari warriors marched in perfect formation, their weapons ready. Lena ducked into cover, her heart pounding. The ordinary Rothari were brutal enough, but this was something far worse. Her comms buzzed. "Lena," her father's voice came through. "We see him." She exhaled. "Orders." There was a pause. Then Elias Voss spoke, his voice calm. "We can't let him reach the bunker. Do what needs to be done." Lena closed her eyes for a moment. Then she steeled herself. "Understood." She switched to the citywide channel. "All remaining units, fall back toward Grid Theta. Reinforcements are not coming. This is where we hold." A few ragged voices acknowledged the command. They all understood what it meant. There would be no retreat from this fight. Lena checked her rifle, then moved toward the Warbringer's path. If this was where they died, then so be it. But they wouldn't die quietly. The first attack came from the rooftops. Hidden snipers fired armor-piercing rounds, aiming for the Warbringer's exposed joints. The shots struck true, but the massive Rothari barely flinched. With a casual flick of his gauntlet, a pulse of energy erupted outward, disintegrating the entire building and the soldiers within. The ground forces struck next. Mines buried beneath the rubble detonated in sequence, sending shockwaves through the Warbringer's ranks. Rothari soldiers were torn apart, but the commander simply kept walking. Lena launched a grenade toward him, but with unnatural speed, he caught it midair. The explosive fizzled uselessly in his grip before he crushed it like a pebble. He turned to face her. Ah, the daughter. Then he moved. One moment, he was 10 meters away. The next, he was right in front of her. Lena barely had time to dodge as his gauntlet slammed into the ground where she had stood. The impact shattered the pavement, sending debris flying. She rolled, came up firing, her shots hammering into his armor. Nothing. The Warbringer smiled. "You are not enough." Then he struck. Faster than she could react, his massive fist crashed into her side, and everything went dark. Darkness swallowed her. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no feeling, just the weightless abyss of unconsciousness. Then, like a drowning woman breaking the surface, Lena gasped awake. Pain flooded every nerve in her body. Her ribs burned, her vision swam, and something warm trickled down her face. Blood, most likely. Her armor's impact gel had saved her from being turned to pulp, but barely. She lay among the rubble of a collapsed building, thrown through at least 2 walls by the Warbringer's strike. Her comm crackled in her ear. "Commander, do you read? We're falling back. But, damn it, they've breached the outer bunker lines. The Warbringer is." The transmission cut out in a burst of static. Lena groaned, forcing herself onto her hands and knees. Dust and smoke filled the air, but she could still hear the distant roar of battle. The Warbringer was still advancing. She gritted her teeth. "Not yet. I'm not done yet." With a shaky breath, she pushed herself to her feet. Her rifle was gone, but she still had her sidearm. Useless against him, but better than nothing. She staggered forward, navigating the ruins. Then she heard him. The Warbringer's voice echoed across the burning city. "Your warriors flee. Your stronghold crumbles. Your father waits for death." Lena clenched her fists. "Keep talking, you bastard. I'm coming for you." She moved, forcing her battered body onward. Bastion 4 wasn't just a fortress. It was home. Every step the Warbringer took toward the bunker was an insult, an abomination. Humanity didn't bow. Humanity didn't break. And neither would she. Bunker Command Center. Elias Voss stood at the heart of Bastion's last defensive bastion, surrounded by exhausted officers and soldiers gripping their weapons with white-knuckled hands. The bunker's last defensive shields flickered as Rothari shock troops stormed the perimeter, overwhelming the automated turrets. "Governor," a lieutenant whispered. "He's coming." Elias exhaled. "I know." The Warbringer stepped through the smoke, standing at the entrance of the bunker. His massive form was wreathed in the dying embers of the battle, his crimson eyes locked onto Elias. "You are the last of your line," the Warbringer growled. "Kneel." Elias Voss did not kneel. Instead, he pulled his sidearm and fired. The shot slammed into the Warbringer's faceplate and did nothing. The Rothari commander smirked, stepping forward. "Foolish." He raised his gauntlet, preparing to strike the death blow. Then a shot rang out. Not Elias's. The Warbringer staggered as something struck his exposed side. Not a bullet. Something different. Something powerful. His armor flared, trying to adapt, but the energy signature of the shot wasn't human. It was Rothari. The Warbringer turned, his eyes narrowing. Lena Voss stood in the wreckage behind him, a Rothari plasma rifle in her hands. She bared her teeth in a bloody grin. Surprised, the Warbringer's red eyes flared as he turned to face Lena. The wound on his side, small but real, was the first he had taken in the entire battle. His monstrous form straightened, his gauntlets crackling with barely contained fury. Lena wiped blood from her mouth and squared her stance. The stolen Rothari plasma rifle hummed in her hands, its power core still unstable from her hurried modifications. She had scavenged it from a fallen elite soldier on her way here, rerouting its charge output to overload with every shot. A jury-rigged one-time weapon. She needed to make it count. The Warbringer's voice was no longer amused. "You defile our weapons with your human touch. Do you think that changes anything?" Lena's smirk didn't waver. "Yeah," she said, leveling the rifle. "I do." She fired. The modified weapon roared, sending a high-energy bolt straight at the Warbringer's chest. His adaptive armor shifted, trying to compensate, but it couldn't. The shot overloaded his defenses, blasting through his plating and sending him staggering backward. The bunker's defenders moved. Elias Voss barked the order. "Now, all units, fire at will." Every surviving soldier in the command center unleashed hell. High-caliber rounds, grenades, and scavenged energy weapons lit up the Warbringer's form. His armor, already destabilized, cracked under the onslaught. He let out a guttural roar, slamming his fists into the ground, sending out a shockwave that threw soldiers back. But Lena held firm. The plasma rifle's core overloaded in her hands, heating up to critical levels. She had one shot left. The Warbringer charge. She knelt, bracing the rifle against a chunk of rubble. Steady. The Warbringer raised his gauntlet for the killing blow. Lena pulled the trigger. Boom. The final shot tore through his chest, a blast of pure energy that erupted from his back in a cascade of molten metal and scorched flesh. The impact sent him crashing to his knees, his gauntlets flickering with dying energy. For the first time, the Warbringer looked, stunned. Lena limped forward, standing over his fallen form. Smoke curled from the gaping hole in his torso. His breath came in ragged, uneven gasps. His crimson eyes, once filled with unshakable certainty, now held something unfamiliar. Doubt. Lena dropped the ruined rifle and drew her sidearm. She pressed the barrel to his forehead. "You should have left us alone." She pulled the trigger. The Warbringer slumped forward dead. For a moment, no one moved. Then the Rothari outside, seeing their champion fall, hesitated. And hesitation was all the humans needed. Elias raised his voice. "Bastion 4 stands. Push them back." A war cry erupted from the defenders as they surged forward. The Rothari broke, retreating toward their landing zones. Bastion 4 had survived. Humanity had held. But the war was far from over. The Warbringer's corpse lay still, his once mighty form reduced to cooling metal and burnt flesh. Around him, the battlefield was quiet. Only the crackle of fire and the distant screams of retreating Rothari forces remained. Lena exhaled shakily, holstering her sidearm. Her hands trembled, her body barely holding together. She had won. They had won. But at what cost? She turned, taking in the remains of Bastion 4. The outer defenses were obliterated, entire sectors of the city reduced to charred ruins. The command bunker still stood, but barely half of its structure had collapsed under the orbital bombardment. Smoke and ash choked the air, and the bodies of human and Rothari alike littered the streets. The victory felt fragile. Her comm crackled. "Commander, we've secured the perimeter. The Rothari are retreating to their warships." Elias Voss's voice cut through. "How many survivors?" There was a pause. "Too few, sir." Lena clenched her jaw. She had known the answer before she even asked. She limped toward the bunker, every step sending sharp pain through her ribs. Her father stood near the entrance, his face lined with exhaustion. When their eyes met, he gave her a nod, not of approval, nor of pride, but of understanding. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Elias said, "It's not over." Lena sighed. "I know." Even as the Rothari retreated, their warships lingered in orbit. The enemy had taken a severe blow, but they weren't defeated. Not yet. A scout rushed forward, his face grim. "Governor, Commander, we intercepted a transmission from the Rothari fleet." Elias tensed. "Play it." The scout tapped his wrist console. The message was garbled, damaged from the battle, but one phrase came through clearly. "Rothari High Command has acknowledged. Deployment of cleansing protocols. Planetary extermination fleet en route." Silence. Lena felt her stomach drop. Elias's voice was ice. "How long?" The scout swallowed. 5 days, sir, maybe less. 5 days. That was all the time they had before a Rothari extermination fleet arrived. Not a battle group. Not an occupation force. A fleet designed to wipe out entire planets. Lena looked at her father. "If we don't stop them, we die." Elias finished. "All of us." A cold wind swept through the ruined city, carrying the stench of smoke and death. The battle for Bastion 4 was over, but the war for humanity's survival had just begun. Lena straightened, ignoring the pain in her body. "Then we have 5 days to make them regret ever coming here." Elias nodded. "Let's get to work." That was all the time Bastion 4 had before the extermination fleet arrived. It wasn't just another battle. This was annihilation. There would be no prisoners, no occupied territories. The Rothari would glass the planet, burn every trace of human life from its surface, and move on without a second thought. Lena refused to let that happen. Standing in the battered war room of the command bunker, she stared at the holographic display of the incoming fleet. It was massive, more than a dozen planet-killer dreadnoughts, flanked by hundreds of escort ships. Bastion 4's remaining defenses couldn't hold against that kind of firepower. Elias Voss stood beside her, arms crossed. "We don't have the fleet, the numbers, or the firepower to fight this." Lena glanced at the few remaining officers and specialists gathered around. "Then we don't fight fair." She turned to the chief engineer, an older man named Harlan Greaves, whose face was streaked with grease and exhaustion. "How many nukes do we have left?" Greaves grimaced. 3 operational warheads. Maybe 4 if we can scavenge from the wreckage. Lena exhaled. "Not enough. Can we get a message out to the core worlds?" A comms officer shook his head. "Not with the Rothari still jamming long-range signals." Elias ran a hand through his graying hair. "So we're alone." For a moment, silence filled the room. The weight of the inevitable hung over them all. Then Lena's eyes sharpened. "No," she said. "We're not." Everyone turned to her. Lena stepped forward. "The Rothari aren't expecting a counterattack. They think we'll dig in and die like good little humans. But what if we take the fight to them?" Elias frowned. You're talking about boarding their ships. She nodded. Not just any ship. We take control of one of their command carriers. Those things coordinate the fleet's movements. Disable one, and we create chaos in their ranks. Steal it, and we break their entire battle plan. Greaves whistled. That's insane. Lena smirked. Yeah, but so is sitting here waiting to die. Elias considered her words, then nodded slowly. If we're going to do this, we need a way past their defenses. Greaves straightened. We might have a solution for that. He brought up a schematics display, showing the ruins of Bastion 4's orbital defense platforms. Most were shattered wrecks, but a few were still partially operational. If we overload the fusion cores in these stations, we create a massive energy surge, enough to momentarily disrupt their sensor grid. It won't last long, maybe 2 minutes at best, but it might be enough to slip a strike team onto one of their carriers. Lena grinned. Then that's our opening. Elias met her gaze. Who leads the team? Lena strapped a fresh power cell into her rifle. I do. The plan was madness. But madness was all they had left. As the Rotheri extermination fleet loomed closer, Lena and her strike team boarded a stolen Rotheri shuttle, hiding among the debris field of Bastion 4's shattered defense grid. Graves and his engineers worked furiously, rigging the ruined orbital platforms to overload their fusion cores. The waiting was the hardest part. Lena tightened her grip on her rifle, glancing at her team. Battle-hardened survivors, their faces set in grim determination. There were no guarantees, no second chances. They either hijacked a command carrier, or Bastion 4 was finished. Her comm crackled with Elias's voice. It's time. A blinding explosion tore through the void as the fusion cores ignited. The shockwave rippled outward, creating a storm of electromagnetic interference. The Rotheri fleet's sensors flickered. And for exactly 90 seconds, their security grid went blind. Lena didn't hesitate. Go. The stolen shuttle powered up, breaking from the debris field and racing toward the nearest command carrier, a massive serpent-like warship, bristling with weapon emplacements and docking bays. The Rotheri noticed too late. By the time their security grid rebooted, Lena's team had already breached the hangar bay, weapons blazing as they tore through the startled defenders. Plasma fire rained in all directions, but the humans moved with ruthless efficiency. They weren't here to fight a war. They were here to win it in one strike. Lena charged forward, gunning down a Rotheri officer before slamming a detonation charge against a bulkhead. Breach in 5, she called. The explosion tore open a path into the bridge corridor. The Warbringer may have been dead, but his sub-commanders still remained. They had to take control before the Rotheri regained their footing. The battle turned brutal. The Rotheri, now fully alerted, fought like demons. Close-quarters combat erupted in the narrow hallways. Knife fights, rifle stock bashes, desperate struggles for survival. Lena took a glancing blow from a Rotheri's gauntlet, the impact nearly shattering her shoulder. She ignored the pain, drove a combat knife into his throat, and kept moving. They'd reached the bridge doors. A heavy blast door stood between them and victory. The ship's command crew was likely inside, locking it down to prevent a takeover. Lena didn't have time for a siege. She grabbed a fallen Rotheri and pressed his biometric hand against the scanner. The doors hissed open, and she threw a grenade inside. A thunderous boom shook the bridge. Her team stormed in, cutting down the remaining officers before they could react. Lena rushed to the controls, eyes scanning the alien interface. The ship's Fleet Link beacon was still active, broadcasting orders to the extermination force. A wicked grin crossed her face. She activated the comms. The entire Rotheri fleet heard her voice. This is Commander Lena Voss of Bastion 4. Your leader is dead. Your command ship is mine. And I have one word for you. Retreat. For the first time in the war, the Rotheri hesitated. Then, one by one, their ships began to pull away. Bastion 4 had not fallen. Humanity had won.